And now I'm going to ask Brian Weeden to come up and take over the podium. As many of you know, he's a technical advisor for the Secure World Foundation and is going to be the facilitator here for our SSA policy discussion. Brian?
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Weeden. I'm the Director of Program Planning for Secure World Foundation. For those who haven't heard of us, we're a small nonprofit organization. We focus on long-term sustainability of space for benefits on Earth. And so within that sustainability of space mission, there's a huge piece of that, which is knowing what's going on in orbit, the space situation awareness, and then trying to make sure that we can sustainably use space for all the great things we use it for today and all the great things coming into the future. And one of the recent developments that those people who come to this conference for several years have seen is the rise of commercial space situation awareness. There are now many companies out there, growing every year, who are providing commercial data, commercial software, commercial services and analytics, and the number has been growing pretty rapidly. I think 5 years ago there was maybe 1 or 2, and nowadays I can name a dozen at least. And it seems every year we come to AMOS, there's more. So this morning we wanted to have a panel discussion that kind of focused on how that commercial SSA sector has evolved over the last few years, and talk a little bit about where it's going, some of the challenges it faces, both from a business case, but also from a policy case, and to tie into some of the things that Doug mentioned, what is the role that this commercial SSA sector is going to play in advancing some of those principles that he talked about going forward. So this morning I have with me six people, all of whom work for companies that are involved in the commercial SSA sector. Starting from the opposite side from me, we have Stuart Bain. He's the CEO of Northstar. They're a Canadian company that wants to do a constellation in low Earth orbit that's going to do remote sensing, but also SSA. We then have Tom Kubancic. He's the Vice President for Advanced Programs for Applied Defense Solutions. They're working on a network that provides services to the U.S. government and industry. Then I have Ed Liu. He's the VP for Strategic Projects at Leo Labs. They're building out commercial ground-based radars for tracking stuff in low Earth orbit. We then have Paul Welsh. He's the VP of Business Development for AGI. I think as everyone knows, several years ago they launched the ComSpock, which is kind of the first big commercial SSA enterprise, and I've been working closely with the Space Data Association, as other operators. We then have Doug Hendricks. He's the CEO of Exolantic Solutions. They have one of the largest commercial networks of ground-based telescopes, tracking things in deep space. And last and definitely not least, Helen Reed. She's the co-founder and CTO of Chanda Space Technologies. They have a plan to go out and do commercial inspections of satellites in the geo orbit. Instead of having each kind of give some opening remarks, what we've done is we put together a short little video montage that has some of the things that the commercial SSA world can do today and coming in the near future. And if we can go ahead and play that right now, I'm just going to give a couple little comments as it goes. So the first thing is commercial companies are helping with geo collision avoidance. This is an example of a Chinese Fengyun 2 satellite, and there was an avoidance maneuver done to avoid that close approach, and another close approach with Telkom 1, which was a failed anomaly Indonesian satellite, anomalous. This is another example of a geo anomaly detection. As you can see, you had one bright object and smaller bright objects coming off of it. That's generally not a good idea, not a good thing to have happen to your satellite. I think this was actually AMC 9, which recently had an anomaly. This is another anomaly. Again, I think you see, this is Telkom 1 in the bottom left. That is definitely not something you want to have happen to your satellite. And this is another shot of AMC 9. Again, you see lots of little dots coming off the big dot. That is indicative that something did not go well. So this is an image of some of the objects in low Earth orbit that are currently being tracked by 2 of Leo Labs radars. That's a lot more than just a couple of years ago. And then this is an example of what NorthStar is planning is a constellation of satellites looking down, but also have capabilities to look up as well and provide a space-based complement to the ground-based tracking networks. And this is just the beginning. There are other companies that are not highlighted here that are working on variations of this, but also some things that we haven't got a chance to talk about. So I'm going to run the next 50 minutes or so, hopefully as a discussion. I have a list of questions that I've already told them I'm going to be asking in various ways. Hopefully, we can get a little bit of a discussion. Hopefully, they don't always agree with each other on some of this, so we can get a little bit of maybe some different viewpoints on things. But I want to start with Paul. And you know, you guys in AGI were sort of the first movers to come into this commercial SSA world a few years ago. How have you seen the space world changing just over those last few years, and how is that affecting the commercial SSA sector and the opportunities you guys are seeing?
All right, thank you, Brian. Is this on?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Okay. First off, I'd like to say thank you, Dr. Weeden, right? And thank you to MEDB for the opportunity to participate in this important discussion. You know, looking at the changing space environment and what's changed over the last few years, especially the large constellations that have been announced, it's of course driving up the demand for services, not just for those operators, but also for SSA watch centers, you know, and the entire domain. So SSA mission requirements are really being escalated to an entirely new level of precision. I went through in anticipation of this question and we looked up some numbers for some of the mega constellations. SpaceX, as an example, the 4,000 satellite constellation. We did some calculations in a paper published a year ago for how many times one of those active satellites would come within 3 kilometers of a piece of another object in space above 2 centimeters or higher. And if you make that the warning threshold, that translates to how many warnings they would get a year and how manageable that would be. It comes out to be about 7.2 million warnings per year. So that's 824 warnings in an hour. And again, that's for the 4,000 satellite constellation. Iridium, by comparison, would get only 384,000 warnings per year, or about 43 an hour. So the bottom line is across the board, the evolution of these commercial space constellations, as I said, are really driving the need for much higher precision services and higher precision knowledge for every object in space in order to have even a shot at mitigating collision risk. So another question that often comes up whenever we talk about this is you know, the old school approach of looking at it like a big sky problem, right? You know, it's never happened very significantly so far, so what if I just don't worry about collision risk and roll the dice? So what we did is in that same paper calculated similar analysis, except not 3 kilometers now, just within the width of the size of the satellite itself, and figured out how long till a hard body collision was expected to occur. And for that same SpaceX constellation, it's only about a year, which is the average time between a collision with 2 centimeters or above, which qualifies as a debris generating event. For Iridium, it's about 5 years. For OneWeb, it's about 12. The interesting thing about that, you know, that sounds upside down. How is it that Iridium is 5 years and OneWeb is 12, right? And the answer is was referenced by Doug Lavero already. In their orbital shell, there's already been catastrophic debris generating events. So those numbers I cited earlier, as soon as a major debris generating event occurs, they all get worse by an order of magnitude. So it's really not a sustainable situation, and collision risk has to be mitigated and mitigated effectively. So, you know, to get back to how it affects the sector, you know, and where we're going and what it's driving to, is that these operators definitely need an effective service that tracks more objects more accurately, and importantly, with transparency into the precision of all that orbital information, so that they can effectively protect their systems and protect the orbital environment, which is, the ultimate public good that we all have to worry about.
So building off of that, Doug, I want to ask you about the technology. So what's the state of the technology in the commercial sector to do SSA? Is it mature? Is it still developing? Are there pieces of the technology we need to work on, or is it pretty much there and it's just a matter of the integration part of it?
Well, there's definitely a lot to work on. I would say, number one, at EXO, we're definitely leading the way as far as the production from you're taking pictures, you clean up the image, you detect satellites, you form tracks, you put them in a catalog, and that's great. We do that. There's a lot of other folks on the panel, ADS and other folks that are working in the industry to do the same thing. That's going to become commodity, I would say, over the next few years. So the ability to take pictures, turn them into something that you can form an orbit on, is going to be a commodity. Where the major growth is, and you probably see a lot of papers here, is what do you do with that? So, for example, we're starting to productize, if that's even a word, I'm not sure if that's a word. It's now a word, I made it a word. And offer services based on that. And that's a very, that's an emerging, very small but emerging industry as far as helping commercial owners and operators. For example, AGI has done a good job over the last years convincing them that they have a problem. They don't know exactly where they are in space. So there are things that you can do, help them calibrate their antennas, you can provide them better orbits than they have. That's been sort of slow going. So where I see the technology going is folks on this panel, they're working on infrastructure to take more pictures, and there's going to be more pictures and detections and tracks and more objects. Is how do you turn that into services to offer to the commercial community, and that also then comes into, say, military or other, say, U.S. government interests like Doug talked about. I think in the future, the pull is going to be, or there's going to be a push of those capabilities into the government as services, and I think that's really where I'm hoping things go. I think the last thing is analytics. As far as new technologies come from folks that don't have a commercial interest. And so there's got to be folks working on analytics as these data sets become available to do new R&D to find, is it going to be big data, deep neural nets, Bayes nets, to take that data and do something new that we haven't thought of yet. That's going to be, critical for the future.
Mm-hmm. So building off of that, Tom, that leads to this question about what does the market look like for this data and these services analytics? You guys at ADS have been involved in this. DARPA recently closed up a program called Orbital Outlook that was intended to kind of see, is there in fact a market? What does that market look like? Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of where that's headed?
Sure. We at ADS started following the Orbital Outlook program as a performer, but also we looked at Orbital Outlook and understood that it was not only a technology demonstration project, but it was a way of looking at the world in terms of open data, data from many sources, methods to be able to understand how to trust the data and how to rate the data, and then how to take all these diverse data types and how to put those in a database and be able to process those in a way that can provide consistency in the sort of answers that you're getting. Travis Blake first started that program at DARPA, and Jeremy Raley continued that program. So I think that as we look at the market today, we've really bought into those strategies in terms of what Orbit Outlook was trying to prove. And so what we've done is we've tried to affect the marketplace and make the data market work. And so as you look at the data market, we believe that you need a lot of data. It needs to be globally sourced. It needs to be overlapping and redundant as much as possible. That way you're not relying on any single source of data to provide your view of what may be the truth, or what you're assessing as the truth. But also you need to establish a service level within that market. And so service levels have to, and we have had fantastic experiences in working with some of the companies here, Exo Analytics and our friends at Leo Labs, because we've been able to put in a machine-to-machine communications from our system to be able to task their sensors, to be able to have a consistent way of how the sensors were initially calibrated back to our system, how we take additional calibration measurements, and how we understand the quality of the data on a daily basis. And then how we, on the data delivery side, the sort of latencies that we have that establish the level of service coming back. So we've been very pleased that we, in some of our turnarounds from when we are processing observations, and in one of our systems today, we're processing a couple 100,000 observations every day. But we, for example, when we detect a maneuver, we're able to go ahead and generate a tasking request, send it out machine to machine, get the tasking request accepted by EXO and Leo Labs Radar. We have other data providers, and to get the data back from the telescopes within 4, 5, 6 minutes. And so that sort of time dominant market service level is really important. So on top of that, as we take a look at data, we believe that, and much as Doug said, the data needs to go to a commodity. So for this to work, data, it needs to be ubiquitous, globally sourced, overlapping, as I said, but multi-phenomenology, day, night, not dependent on weather. But as you are able to bring all of that data in, that ability to keep up on what the data quality is critical. And if you're going to have a lot of data, it has to be inexpensive. So the one last thing that we relate to is we took a look at the Earth observing market, the EO market, and we saw how that market evolved out of the government market from exquisite satellite systems, the commercial satellite systems. Now you take a look at that market, there's time-dominant players like Planet, there's exquisite providers like Digital Globe, there's all sort of pricing from $1 a square kilometer to fairly expensive tasking, but the people who order those know why they're ordering them, and they provide information that fills the knowledge gap. And I think that is exactly where this market's headed.
So, Ed, I want to ask you a combination of what he just talked about and the technology question. So you guys are doing radars, which is a little bit different because most of the commercial stuff started out as optical telescopes. So where do you see the technology for the commercial radar sitting at, and how do you play into that? Where do you see the data market going?
Well, I think, Paul, you made a really good point that what we need to be looking towards is not what are our needs today, but what are our needs going to be over the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Okay? And I don't think anybody here expects that the number of objects in space and the types of operations that we do in space is going to be decreasing. And if you look at even the most conservative of the predictions, there is going to be a lot more activity. And that's what we want. That's in everybody's best interest. And so if we look ahead to what we need to do, we need to make investments in the kind of things that can track hundreds of thousands of objects, and accurately enough so that you do not have thousands of warnings that you need to take action on a day, because you can't do that. So the way around that is more frequent observations and therefore lower uncertainties. And so that's what we're working on at Leo Labs, in particular to solve the LEO problem, which is primarily small debris, and it's so we think radars is the way to go. And I think one other point that I want to agree with is, Tom, your point about having an open system. One of the things, before I was at Leo Labs, I was at Google, helping build Google Maps, Google Earth, Google Street View. And the secret to why that system took off and has become so useful is that it's open. You can add to the system, you can take out what you need, you can build services off of that. And why it's become so extraordinarily useful is that companies like Uber or Lyft or whatever, they could say, oh, we'll just build off of that platform, or we'll use their Maps API in a particular way to suit our purposes and offer another service. And the fact of the matter is, and when we talk to our customers, and you guys are here because there are many different customers with different needs. They're not the same. There are different types of users that all have very, very unique needs, which is why we're all up here. But having a system in which machines can talk to each other and data can be exchanged in open formats is critical to building that ecosystem.
So Stuart, I want to turn to you for this question, because so far all these companies we've been talking to are all American companies, and you guys are trying to do this from a Canadian perspective. So can you talk a bit about that international context? What does the market look like internationally? Is there one? What is that demand, and how are you guys approaching this as a Canadian company?
So you want to know what it's like to be Canadian? It's cold. It's a cold world. Well, as a Canadian, I'm going to tell you that the SSA market is global. As a proud Canadian, I'm going to tell you that 27 years before there was a U.S. Air Force, there was a Royal Canadian Air Force. So, small wedge, big brother follows. I don't think, inspired by Doug Lavero's comments, I don't think a lot has changed. Canada can play a role to get things started, regulatory, entrepreneurship, etc. I mean, let's be fair and be honest. The need is global. The market is something different. Everyone gets hit when something gets hit in space. It's like having a no peeing section of a swimming pool. You can't do that. You're all thinking about that now. Okay, so initially, we have to give credit. I mean, I said it the last time I was here. Isaac Newton said it when he developed his first theory of gravity, is that we can see so far because we stand on the shoulders of giants. And the world needs to recognize that if we have anything or any knowledge of space situational awareness and that we're tracking debris, we owe it all to the United States of America. The U.S. government is footing the bill. The U.S. government is carrying the ball. And frankly, very few spacefaring nations are doing their share to support that. And I think that's important to be recognized. And we can build on that. And I think that's what makes it global cooperation. Canada nationally made a contribution, however small, through the Sapphire program. And that's an attempt to complement what's going on in the United States. But I think initially services, to talk about the markets, initially services will be government services. The government sees the need. The government, from a commercial perspective, may see the value in having the infrastructure not built by them, and also having the value of, if the infrastructure is not built and owned by them, maybe more people will access it and use it and have it more trusted and transparent. Because a commercial entity lives and dies on the ability to deliver quality information. And if it doesn't do that, it doesn't exist, because it has to make a profit. National interests will always play a role and be very important. I think in the short term, governments dominate, US government will dominate. Commercial operators, I think they will look at it from the perspective of, if they get more and more nervous about the safety and the security of their assets, they may want to have more than just free, in quotes, free because it's not free, information services. And so in the early days, a commercial SSA system, or an alternative commercial SSA system, would have to show added value. In the long term, I think, based on, from what I see in the news, the United States is not going to continue to be in the business to do things for its allies and others for free, just based on what I'm seeing on TV. And the US market is the leader. It needs to be recognized as the leader. I think we all understand that any asset in space requires space situational awareness, and generally that asset can't meet its own need. So there's a service that needs to be provided. So the market versus the market versus the customers, the need and the market are two separate things. We all need it, but the U.S. is the leader. Thank you.
So Helen, I want to ask you a version of the same question. You guys are, again, a bit different. You guys are doing stuff in the geo region, looking to do inspections of satellites. Do you see the customer base as commercial companies? Do you see it as governments? Is it global? And how does that, how are you guys envisioning what those opportunities are? Yeah.
Just talk?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's magic.
Okay, magic. We are coming at this from a commercial company with establishing our business plan from the commercial standpoint. So we are establishing it based on commercial customers. So we feel like there is a business case to be made for doing both inspections as well as providing the SSA data. That being said, we also would envision, as we're up there, the government being a customer as well, and also not only U.S. but international organizations. So I see this kind of a worldwide thing and multi-agency industry, so forth.
So another question, you guys are also a little bit different in that because you are doing a space-based service, you had to get a license from the U.S. government, whereas these guys all operating ground-based stuff can just go do what they want to do. What was that experience like? Because you were kind of blazing a trail there.
Yes, we are a space-based remote sensing company, and so it was necessary for us to go down a new path and obtain a license through NOAA, working with various of the agencies of the U.S. government. And it was a new experience for all players involved. And I want to say that on behalf of my CEO, Mr. Adil Jaffrey, and all the members of the Chanda team, it's been actually a pleasure working with all of our various colleagues around the United States government, and we've really appreciated all of their help in helping us get to the point where we are. So thank you as we continue to work it. We recognize that the U.S. government and our company have different priorities and responsibilities, and so that is why we have to navigate down this path together. We have to realize, as was pointed out by Doug Lavero, that we're all occupying the same space up there. And so the real key has been communication, being very, very transparent in what we're doing with the government, trying to understand the differences between our goals, which are economic, and the government's goals, which are national security, protecting the public good, and so forth, as was said. And so it's been very, very important to socialize our concept, to try to see where commonalities may exist in our mission between us and with the government, and come in with the standpoint of complementing or enhancing capabilities and not replacing. That has been absolutely a key. It's also been key to be flexible and to be responsible, and again with this idea that we're up there sharing space, and we have to be sure that we are doing no harm. So bottom line from our experiences, and as Doug was also pointing out, it's going to be important to help to set up the standards and the rules by which we all operate as we're operating in space. And so we hope that we are helping to move that particular facet of this whole process along. So the key has been to communicate and be transparent in what we're doing. And we've been very happy so far with the way it's been going.
So a question that, we got a couple of questions from the audience, and they basically revolve around the issue of how do you compete with free? So as we all know, US.com provides to some extent a level of free data and a free service. So as you guys are looking to build business models off of this, and if you, Paul, you want to start, and then I'll open it up and what to add in. What do you guys see that as competition? Do you see it as a hindrance? How does that work into your business plans?
Yes, thanks, Brian. This panel's only an hour long, so I'll try to keep my opinions on this less than that. Free is very compelling to anybody. It's I've been in many meetings where we say, here's all the problems and here's what your needs are, and they say, yeah, but that's free. It's like, well, we have to go over again that doesn't suit the needs that you have, right? And eventually you get past that, but the bottom line is that the government offering a free service is definitely a hindrance to the development of the commercial market. Right now, we all have to compete with the government, and the cost to the government of that is that if the government wants to gain the benefit of the commercial SSA sector, then competition from the U.S. government supporting organizations really needs to cease. That's not going to be an easy thing to do. There's a significant amount of change there. Rice bowls will be tipped over, maybe broken. But for government to receive the true benefits of the commercial approach and the innovation that's driven by that, that's really going to be necessary. The commercial companies, here and in other commercial sectors, they invest risk capital, create capability, and they take the risk that the marketplace will buy their products or services. They're 100% motivated to proactively address market needs and capture the customers. They'll keep evolving their capabilities. They'll maintain and grow the customer base. It's the standard commercial model. It's what drives Apple to sell more iPhones, right? Now, that's distinctly different from traditional U.S. government contracting approaches. In that case, the processes are bound to a static set of requirements, which are subject to lengthy change processes. This stifles innovation. It fails to keep up with the changing mission needs of today's dynamic space environment. All those challenges and those numbers we put forward earlier, the traditional government contracting approach is really just not going to be able to move fast enough to meet that need. So I think government really needs to embrace commercial SSA to gain the benefits of it. It's not about us, it's about government gaining those benefits, right? They've got to embrace the model. So stopping free services is really just the first step to cease hindering innovation. Obviously, some of the examples, JSPOC currently provides free data and CA services to non-military operators. When there's a clear, uncertainty is bad for commercial markets. Doug Lavero talked earlier about mining under the sea and the fact that that hasn't taken place because of the uncertain legal environment. There's until a clear timeline is established for JSPOC to stop the free services, that'll inhibit the growth and investment of commercial providers.
So Tom, do you want to?
Yeah, so I see that the challenge goes back on the commercial companies, though, that there will always be some level of free service of government data here. I think the governments have, a responsibility to go ahead and provide, to some extent, that service. What we need to do is we need to figure out how it is that we extend that in the information and the decision-making power that we add on top of that. So the analytics, as Doug mentioned earlier, is a big part of that. We speak to owner-operators, and yes, they mention, it's hard for me to justify buying something from you when I get something free from the government. And then you talk to them for a while, and they say, but I don't really kind of understand this thing that I get from the government because I don't know what the error level is with it. I don't understand covariance well. I don't understand how to mix this data from the government with my own ephemeris. And so the discussion moves on to a level of, well, yes, there's free, but then there's decision making on top of what they get for free. And I think we as an industry have to focus on decision making and decision making power. That's going to enable the large constellations to fly, thousands of satellites, and also to be able to codify that in a way that you can run those satellite systems in an automated way. So I think there's a lot of work to be done on top of the free that is a healthy market.
Doug, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm talking, okay. Number one, as Stuart said, the U.S. government is currently the biggest funder of SSA. They're the biggest provider of it. I also wanted to add that Brian's wife is Canadian, I believe. Yes, I think he's thinking of you. Anyway, so they're our biggest customer. They're also our biggest competitor. And that is really as the commercial companies are building capabilities that were once provided only by the U.S. government, there's a natural competition, and there's a lot of tension associated with that. For a commercial company looking to break in, we are investing our own capital, and as Paul said, at the risk that there will be a market there. Most of us do it because we're passionate about what we do, So we'll continue to do it, and I'm hoping that we do find a way to work more closely with the government rather than it being competitive. But I will say there's a free service out there, spacetrack.org, it was mentioned, and our experience has been that it's a service that meets a certain level of quality, which is, I would say in the past, been seen to be good enough to fly satellite. I think operators have learned over the past few years that it can be better. The question is, are they willing to pay for it? And what Tom said is true. They say, free's good enough. But I will say, we've kind of cracked it. It's been very simple. You have to save the customer money. And it's hard to save them money over something that's free. So the opportunities are in the niches right now. And I'll just give an example. One of our best customers is Boeing. They have the Xeno 9 propulsion thrusters where they put the satellite up into an eccentric orbit, planning to circularize it to GEO. Well, the JSPOC can't provide a service for them to track that. And so it might be one way to do it is with ranging antennas, but the satellite will go all over different longitudes, and so the cost of doing that is rather high. So in our case, there was an opportunity where the cost of tracking it by telescopes was lower, and it turned out we had higher quality data. So that was kind of a niche example. But so in this case, we saved the money, we lowered their risk. So if we tracked it with telescopes, then our telescopes just kind of pooped out and we didn't offer them any data. We had to prove to them we could meet the service level, that we would be 97% up at any given time. And really, you got to save them money, you've got to lower risk, and you've really got, I don't even know what I wrote here. I wrote something here that I don't know if you can tell that. Anyway, so the kinds of services that you can actually provide right now are kind of boutique services, so help them fly their spacecraft better, give them better position information. We've done conjunction screenings, and when AMC-9 was having trouble finding the satellite, they called us. So that was in the paper. And we found it for them and gave them orbits on it. But we didn't make a lot of money off of that, but this market is very small and it's growing. So I would say that there are things that JSPOC doesn't provide, and this is the one thing I learned this summer. We stare at about 20% of the belt all the time, and we're scanning the rest, and we're building our network out. In the areas where we stare, in let's say a degree patch, there are a dozen or more, maybe dozen or dozens of things go through our field of view that we track, that we never really see again, but they're real objects in space that are not in the spacetrack.org catalog. Well, what are those and where they come from? Someone out there can multiply 12 by 360. I'm not going to do it for you now. That's a lot of objects. And so the question is, what's the risk to those? And so what I feel I learned this summer is, I don't know where all that debris came from, but I really am wondering if we understand the debris population at GEO and the risk, given the delta V's involved. I don't feel like I understand it. I haven't spoken to anyone who thinks they understand it. And so the real question to the spacecraft operators is do they want more information on that? And that is not being provided by the Air Force today.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that all this brings to bear is, the questions about free service, but there's a lot at stake here, right? I mean, everybody needs to operate safely in space, right? And there's arguably a minimum standard of safe operations that everyone needs to adhere to. So, an operator over here saying, well, I'm good enough over here and I'm good enough there, that's not necessarily the way to run a railroad here. I mean, we're talking about protecting the orbital environment, right? So that's, that may be trumping in some of your future questions, but that is inextricably factored into this whole free question of how do you ensure a minimum standard of performance of safety, right? There's a lot at stake.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about investment. Leo Labs is venture finance, so venture capitalists have invested there and their partners' money with the idea that they can create a service that's going to be useful and be a profitable business. And the question is, how do we build the system, again, that can handle the types of traffic at the safety level we think is going to be required in the future? And my feeling is that we need to encourage this ecosystem to make those investments in capital equipment to go handle a system which is going to be constantly evolving. I mean, even if you build something that's good for what the situation is 5 years from now, what about 5 years after that? This is an ongoing process. And so, for instance, at Leo Labs, we have raised money to build a network, a worldwide network of 2 centimeter capable phased array radars. So capable of seeing those, and we'll be doing that over the next 2 years. And we've already built our first network. This is our upgraded network now.
2 years.
Yes, we are. Things are proceeding well. But, shameless plug here for Cyrus Foster out there from Planet and Mike Nichols. They've got a talk this afternoon already on using our 10 centimeter network with to operate a large constellation, showing how that can be done using commercial data.
Great.
And so the process is happening.
Stuart, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. Not only being Canadian, I'm also Scottish, and there's a very important Scottish axiom that you all will understand. How much scotch will a Scotsman drink? The answer, any given amount. But it's not free. People still buy scotch, right? So the concept that, taking it more holistically, it's not free. The US taxpayers pay for it. It's not free. It's available, but it's not free. And so it's not as much what you do, and I think all the panelists are agreeing, it's how you do it. I go to the cinema, I watch a movie. I go to the store, I rent a DVD. I used to go and get a beta or a VHS. How do I watch movies now? On Netflix. To quote from Jurassic Park, Doug Lavero, one of my favorite movies of all time, one of the quotes was, if it's heavy, don't touch it because it means it's expensive. But the quote that I'm thinking of is, nature finds a way. That is the role of a commercial enterprise, is to find the way, not the what, but the how. And a commercial enterprise cooperates with government. We all know that SSA has huge national security interests. So cooperation with the government is a given. That's a given. You have to do that. But at the end of the day, added value. So proposing to complement the data, provide more information, provide more accurate information, and we're all talking about it. Where's the nuts and bolts of all of this? Fast and accurate is something that really resonates with everybody here. Fast and accurate ephemeris calculation, fast and accurate orbit determination, fast and accurate track association, the ability to do planning and scheduling so that you can reduce the error ellipsoid, and for what concerns mostly military activities, follow chain of custody during geotransfer orbit. Those are the activities. And the data is important, but the added value to the commercial enterprises that comes with the commercial enterprises, just want to highlight that, has all been said on this panel, and I think it's important to note. So increasing, and Tom pointed out, I like the word ubiquitous, a ubiquitous system is essential. And I don't see the government as a competitor. It's really a hurdle potentially to be overcome, but it's a step in the process to building an overall global system.
So I want to pick up on something that Paul said, which was, a minimum level of service or expectation. Shameless plug for ourselves. Secure World put out our own handbook for new actors earlier this year, which is our kind of attempt at a welcome to the club guide for governments and companies getting into the space world about, here are the basic things you should know. As you guys are out interacting with satellite operators, what is the basic level of knowledge across, let's say, the new startup companies and the people flying CubeSats? Do they have a good level of starting knowledge? A lot of work to do there. And how does that interact with what you guys are offering as a commercial service?
I would say it's all over the map, right? I mean, there's some that are very dialed in and very attentive to it. There's other operators I've had tell me, we've never thought of this before at all, right? So, it's all over the map, which is really indicative of the fact that that there's got to be more. There's more done. Doug was saying, rules are good, right? You need some rules. Nobody wants rules imposed on them. Nobody wants bad rules, but you have to have some organization out there. So that's my experience, and we deal with lots of different operators, in all regimes, and it's a you can cover the waterfront with different opinions on it and levels of performance.
So definitely agree. It's all over the map. You visit the big owner operators that are flying the big geo constellations, and even you would think that they would have a view of investment with the sort of products that they would buy and value-added services. But even they're from one to the other, they see the value in spending money to be in the Space Data Association. They see the value in buying extra products and services. And you go talk to the other, and they have just as much at stake when it comes to the number of satellites they fly. And you could come out of the meeting and think, ignorance is bliss, possibly. But the other part of the problem is that we all have to coexist in all the different orbit regimes. So you take a look at some of the third, I'll call world actors, or some of the universities, and some of the low-cost sort of missions that are out there. They can't afford a lot of sophistication. And I think their attitude also is that, well, I deserve access to space also. So I shouldn't have a requirement to have, 3 astrodynamicists on staff to be able to run calculations. So it is all over the place out there.
So I want to add on to that real quick. As someone who works for a nonprofit organization that can't afford probably to buy anything you guys are offering, how do you answer that part of the market demand, right? There is this is public good function that currently people that can go to spacetrack.org and they can get data and they can use it for a whole variety of non-commercial purposes. How do you answer that piece of the market demand if it's a purely commercial-led industry?
So, two-part answer here, right? One is the fundamental premise that everyone needs to operate safely in space, right? So then the question is, okay, how do you do that, right? And if you look at who can afford it, right? The traditional, that question comes up all the time, and typically it goes into educational institutions and things like that, right? And that's another thing we can all agree on here, that education, STEM, everything else is very important. This entire room, I'm sure, would agree with that, right? So then you look at the ways to solve that. A lot of times people then springboard right into the whole thing needs to be a free service, right? Which I think is a shortcut to looking at some more balanced approaches that don't disrupt commercial market incentives and therefore derail innovation. It could even, one concept could be that licensed, and I'll say space traffic management service providers, right? Because SSA is one level and providing warnings and everything else is, yet another level. Maybe the regime for that and the licensing of STM providers includes definition of operators that are not able to afford it. There could be tangible criteria identified that they could qualify for. And if you want to be a licensed STM provider that meets minimum standards, the table stakes for that could be that you have to deliver service to this small segment of the population that is not resourced to pay standard commercial rates. So that's one way to do it, right? But it starts with that premise that everybody's got to operate safely in space. You can't get on the road without a driver's license, and operating in space is a privilege, not a right, right? So if you're going to be there and you're going to do it, you have to do it the right way, and there's ways in which that can be done.
So I will say, actually, Outer Space Treaty does say that all states are guaranteed the right to use space for.
States are.
Oh, yes, states, yes.
Individual space actors are not, right? And in fact, it's the role of the government to decide who gets to fly and who doesn't and how they do it.
If they so choose to do so, yes.
So, Brian, I do want to add something to that.
Go ahead.
So number one, I fully agree. I'm absolutely on board. There needs to be a central body that is looking out for the public good. I don't know if it was John Nash, I saw that movie where he went crazy, where he talked about the pigeon theory, and all the pigeons act in their own self-interest, but in some way in the self-interest of the group as a whole. And that's currently how GEO operates today, but they only know what they know. So in the video montage you saw, ADS showed some fragments coming off of AMC9, and we showed some as well. I think what most people don't know, those happened on different days. And satellite telemetry doesn't tell the spacecraft operator things came off of your spacecraft. And if spacetrack.org or the JSPOC doesn't tell them, then they just don't know. It was clearly evident this summer, so there were definitely 3 distinct fragmentation events that were unknown by the operators because they just don't have that data. There's really a need for more surveillance so that they can, even if I'm operating in my own best interest and the best interest of the environment for all of us, the things I don't know, I can't do anything about. And I really do think we need to step up our game. I really, again, I want to express my concern for not really understanding the debris environment up there. I think, if it's a body like the FAA or if it's the SDA, I think that we as a community really do need to take it to another level where we are seriously looking at assessing the risk to the spacecraft up there. I'm not saying I know what it is, I'm saying I don't know what it is, but some of the things I've seen this summer have scared me a little bit.
So another question we got in here says, basically talks about the need for different types of data beyond just the metric tracking obs that we've been talking about. Do you guys, is anyone working on that? Things like RF spectrum analysis, dealing with RFI, or I know Helen, you guys are looking at imaging, other things. So is there discussion about providing different things, and do you see RF spectrum analysis or RF detection being a part of SSA as well?
Yeah, yes, we do. In fact, the systems that we've put together do include passive RF, along with radar and with optical measurements. And talking about the AMC9 event, the day we saw the whole thing, but the day of the initial event, we were able to correlate a passive RF observation that was taken within 5 minutes of the initial fragmentation that confirmed what was going on with the payloads. So being able to correlate that information and do that in a timely manner was very valuable. I think that you can take a look at a number of aspects of RF, and that gets into some exquisite characterization. Beyond that, in the optical, certainly doing the astrometric, but looking at the photometric, which can provide more information on stability and pattern of life and control, and looking at things in terms of like maneuvers and maneuver profiles, both in astro and in photometric, to see if is this behavior pattern something I've seen before? If so, I'm probably okay. If it's out of family, what do I need to do? Well, I probably need to go get more information, right? But so there's a lot of, and if you take a look at things in broadly across the spectral environment, I think there's a lot of great potential work there.
Hey, if I could add one thing, I think where you're going is, we've talked a lot about physical collisions and awareness of physical locations, and passive RF and other sensor types contribute to all that. RF collisions, are a whole nother area that, so that full spectral awareness of who's transmitting, where they going, who are they interfering with. There's a whole set of licensing rules that they're supposed to be adhering, that they will be adhering to, but there's going to be the inevitable interferences or losses of signals and adjudication, right, thank you, of all those circumstances. So, that's another thing that is evolving in the sector, is that spectral situational awareness as well. And one provider that's not on the stage is the Hawkeye 360 crew, that is all over that. So, that's another key sector that's going to be critical, especially when these large constellations come online.
So I'm going to finish up with tying a couple questions here together that basically amount to which of you is going to win, and how many companies can this commercial market support over the long term?
Is this that right stuff moment where we all raise our hands?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, we don't think we're going to win.
Everybody wins when we're doing the right thing in terms of providing an improved service. The goal is to improve the service, and the data is the starting point. And it's not like developing an app on an open format or leaving something out there for people to develop. There's like this many people in the world who can process this data. So the real value is in the brilliant minds that do the calculations, that do the ephemeris, that do the orbit tracking, et cetera. So the data and the added value services come from commercial entities who can build on that. There's no winner and loser. The winner is the general public. Everyone, directly or indirectly, uses something that comes from an asset in space. None of us can afford those assets to be inaccessible. None of us can afford certain orbits to no longer be usable or even dangerous to pass through. We can't afford that situation to happen. So the winner is all of us, because that's how we feed ourselves, that's how we know where we're going, and that's how we monitor our planet. So I don't think of it as a confrontationally competitive environment. I think of it as cooperation in space comes from commercial organizations figuring out how to use radar, optical in space, other systems to complement the data source, and then to create, as Tom put it, I like the word ubiquitous system, whereby added value comes downstream from the applications and the application development. There is no winner and loser. We all have to win.
Anyone else?
I think you said it great. So we all have a smartphone. Do we all use AT&T? Do we all use Verizon or Sprint? There's certainly a place for everybody in a marketplace that has free and open competition. And I expect to be seeing all these guys for years to come. Hope I'm here too.
All right. Well, with that, please join me in thanking our panelists for this morning's discussion.